Really do kind of want to put a little personal touch on this too. And I know folks don't do that, but I've known Kristen. I'm thinking it might have been 2014, 2013 before I even moved to my position within a state coalition and working with the Higher Department of Higher Education. Um, that our team from a local rape crisis center came in. And we're able to be and watch a training, a Green Dot training on the University of Dayton's campus as guests, and we just totally vibed, and I loved what was going on. And this was before Kristen like really built the Brooks Center, and which we're talking about today. So I've been able to watch Kristen's career. I'm a fan, so I'm fangirling as well. But what someone built from kind of an idea or concept into what it is today has been a really cool process. So personally, I'm fangirling. So and then professionally, I will also read a bio because it's extraordinary the work that you've been doing. It's hard to capture it in a 5-minute intro, is what I was saying. Kristen Altano-Keene serves as the Assistant Dean of Students and the Director at the Brooks Center at the University of Dayton. The Brooks Center houses relationship education, focusing on relationship with self and others by talking about mental health education, health equity education, um, LGBTQ plus student services, and sexual violence education. Kristen began her career as a sexual violence prevention educator at the University of Dayton, where she became the inaugural advisor of the PAVE Peer Education Program. The Brooks Center now houses 3 peer education programs, all which follow the same similar model. Kristen earned her MS in Student Affairs and Higher Education from Miami University in 2012. She's a certified Green Dot instructor and has taught human sexuality classes as an adjunct faculty at the University of Cincinnati, Miami University, Middletown, and the University of Dayton. It is my pleasure to bring in Kristen to talk about peer educators at the University of Dayton. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Anne. I think we have some mutual adoration for each other. And I always love working with you as well. So thank you so much for this opportunity. And it's wonderful to be with all of you. I would love, if it's okay, to ask you all to drop in the chat an introduction of who you are, and maybe a little bit about what brought you here. So I would encourage you to chat to everyone just so we can all see who's here. Maybe your name, your institution, and what brought you here? Just, a short phrase. Are you launching a peer ed program? Do you currently have one? Are you just curious and that's what brought you here? So while you're typing and sharing that information, I'm also going to invite Colleen McDaniel to introduce herself. I had the opportunity to bring 2 peer educators along with me. Colleen graduated back in 2017, and Michael will be joining in just a few minutes when he gets out of class. And he just graduated this month from UD as well. So 2 different perspectives of where we have been in our peer ed progress. But Colleen, would you mind introducing yourself and sharing a little bit about your experience with PAVE?
Sure. Thanks so much, Kristen. Hi, everyone. My name is Colleen McDaniel. Like Kristen said, I graduated in 2017. I was lucky enough to overlap with some of the original folks who did PAVE. So it's been really wonderful to see it grow. And I'm really excited for Kristen, to share her experience. But when I started, I think there were 10 of us. And by the time I graduated, there were over 30. So it's, we're really hearing from the expert here today. Just a little bit about my own background. Since the University of Dayton, I'm a PhD candidate at Wayne State University. I am in psychology and I research sexual violence perpetration, mostly sexual assault in men. And I'm actually working on this project as well with Anne and Carrie. So I'm so happy to be here in a separate capacity from that. But it's great to meet you all. I've been able to talk to some of you in our information sessions. So yeah, I'm just excited to get into this. Thanks, Kristen.
Awesome. And thank you all for dropping your intros. I appreciate that too. I'm going to go ahead and start to screen share, which means that I won't be able to see your chat, but please continue to do that so that everybody else can. And I have encouraged Colleen to jump in as she is interested or willing. So you might hear her unmute at some point and jump into conversation as well. So let me come over here. Okay, are you all seeing that okay?
Yes, we are.
Yeah, just
Okay,
fine.
cool. Thank you. All right. So, in thinking about peer education, my hope is really to talk about the history of how peer education has developed at UD, a little bit about our current structure, and then to create opportunity for conversation and discussion at the end. So, my hope is that we're going to have plenty of time at the end. That any questions or conversation that might be helpful for us to have, I would love to dive into that. One thing that I do want to just start off the conversation by acknowledging is that we have been through quite the 2 years. And there has been a lot that has impacted all of us in many different ways. And so I just want to name and acknowledge where we are as a country and as a field right now. And to encourage you to take care of yourself in the ways that you need and can to make sure that we can all be sustainable to be able to support the students that we're all serving. So when I know Anne mentioned that I work with the Brooks Center, just to give you a little bit of perspective around what the Brooks Center is. The Brooks Center came together in July 2019, and essentially we had positions across the division that looked at various aspects of education. They were all modeled after the same job description, but they were all separated into different areas of the division. And so in the summer of 2019, for the first time, we essentially brought these different positions together and we said, how great would it be if we essentially were able to look at this from a holistic perspective? And so this is now where we see the Brook Center having been formed. We have 4 different areas within the Brook. So we are really focusing on relationship education with self and others. So everything that we're talking about is helping students think about who they are, how they are becoming who they are, where their influences have come from, and how they're building healthy, hopefully healthy relationships with other people, whether it's roommates, friends, redefining family relationships, romantic partners, hookup partners, whatever that might be for them. We want to help them think about communication, boundary setting, their values and their behavior choices, and how they may or may not align. And so all of these different topics align with this idea of relationship with self and others. We have an amazing team here at the Brook Center, so I want to name them. Each of these folks work with different of the peer or different peer education groups within the Brook Center. So we do have 3 groups. The co-pilots are our health and well-being group. The community leaders are our LGBTQ plus group, and PAVE is our sexual violence group. And that's where we're really going to focus mostly today. But I do want to mention the others because our training model is very intersectional, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. So when we think about some guiding principles, why is peer education important? What does this actually look like? And what do we use to guide our work in peer education? At UD, there's a couple of different models that we use. One is that we really think about the development of the peer educator. So we're thinking a lot about self-authorship. What is their cognitive, intrapersonal, and interpersonal development? We develop training based on these 3 ideas and helping them think through their own relationship with self, with others, and their own intellectual capacity in understanding these topics. We are also thinking greatly about this challenge and support model. And so, how do we provide enough challenge for our peer educators to keep them engaged and keep them involved, to want to stay challenged and stay in the conversation while also providing a high level of support? And the reality is, I saw many of you saying some of you already have peer education programs, some of you are starting. For those of you who have a peer education program, you likely know already that this takes a vast amount of time of staff support to be able to support these students. And so it's really important to make sure that we have the staff structure to be able to provide students the support that they need in order to be as successful as possible. We are huge believers in the diffusion of innovation model at the Brook Center. We love this perspective, this idea that we can get multiple different groups of people bought in at different levels, and how do we essentially create change across campus in a strategic way. And so our peer educators are our innovators. They are the folks that are willing to stand on the street and scream and advocate for this work. Some of them are early adopters. Some of them weren't necessarily the ones who were the first ones screaming on the sidewalk about these topics, but they got bought in because of the enthusiasm of some of our peer educators. And then as we work with them, we help them think about how do you reach out to other early adopters? How do you get other early majority on board so that those late majority and those laggards can jump on board as well? And then finally, we certainly help them think about the social ecological model. How do they start to reach different ways to reach their peers and make an impact at various levels of the institution? Colleen, do you have anything to add here with the theoretical perspective of our work through peer education lens?
Yeah, I think I would just say from a theoretical perspective, you know, I'm sure many of you who have peer educators already or are already thinking about designing peer educators, you probably bought into this idea of social norms and of peer norms. And, we know from a psychological perspective that peers are just such a strong influence on reaching the folks that are the most at risk to perpetrate violence and the folks that are most likely to intervene and be active bystanders. So I would just add that this is a huge key part to reaching people and really getting buy-in from students because of that peer-to-peer connection and the norm setting that we do as peers.
Absolutely. Thank you. So one of the things that we talk to our peer educators about is that they are changing the world every day, and we say that to them. They are changing this campus community for the better, and their job is to go out and continue to change the world. And our job is to be here to support them and as they explore ways that they can do that. And so we historically had said that we empowered students to change the world until recently a colleague said to me that the empowering word implies that I have the power and they don't, and I'm giving it to them. So I don't really know what language I like now. So I am providing a couple of different verbs and ideas maybe that I've been throwing around and brainstorming. Are we encouraging? Are we elevating? Are we creating spaces for? Certainly, I see the role of advisors and oftentimes just getting out of their way, saying yes and empowering them, or so doing some other verb to go out and dream something big and remove as many barriers as possible for them, make sure that they have the training that they need in order to be able to do it well, and then get out of their way and let them do it. So many of the ideas that our peer educators have brought forward, I sat there in the initial meeting going, this will never work. And then all of a sudden they did this amazing thing that I never thought it would be possible to do. And so that is so much of how we think about this work in peer education at UD. So like I mentioned, we have 3 different peer education groups. We also work very closely with our diversity peer educators, which are out of our MEC office on campus. And so the 4 peer education groups in the last couple of years have really started to increase their collaboration with one another, which has been really exciting. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. The bottom left picture is our PAVES with our president, Dr. Spina, who comes in every semester to visit with our peer educators. And then on the bottom right is an event called Our Voices Matter from our community leaders. That was just from Pride Week a couple of weeks ago. So just a quick overview of each of the 3 different peer ed groups. Our co-pilots are peer health coaches. They are trained in motivational interviewing. They sit down with students one-on-one for individual meetings to essentially develop an action plan toward a health and well-being goal that the students are bringing into the room. So this is a group that we're seeing is oftentimes meeting with students who are flirting with going to the counseling center, but maybe aren't feeling quite ready to do that yet. They can meet with a co-pilot, sit down in a one-on-one conversation. Our co-pilots are trained to help them in conversations that they can manage, and then to refer to the counseling center and to make sure that they get in touch with other resources if that's more appropriate for the question that they're bringing forward. Our community leaders are LGBTQ plus group, and so they really focus on educating around sexual orientation and gender identity across campus and making sure that we are building safe and welcoming communities that accept and respect the dignity of every person. And finally, PAVE is our sexual violence prevention group. These folks talk about sexual violence, intimate partner violence, stalking, and then certainly some of the other side of that coin as well, of the healthy relationship development and how we can essentially build capacity across campus to make sure that everyone is respected. So I thought that it might be, this is going to start playing early. So sorry. I thought it might be helpful for you all to see a video that PAVE's actually created of introducing themselves to campus.
So what is PAVE?
We are a student group on campus working towards a safer,
Happier and healthier UD. How are we doing it?
Lots of ways!
As peer educators, we bring a lot of attention to power-based personal violence on college campuses.
From Red Zone presentations for first-year students to sharing survivors' stories at Take Back the Night and supporting survivors during Carry That Weight, we raise awareness and open discussion.
New opportunities to educate the community are constantly available through our partnerships with foundations like One Love and their Escalation Workshop, which we use to raise awareness of relationship violence on college campuses. Who are we?
criminal justice studies majors,
Student Government Association members,
Mechanical engineering majors,
student volunteers,
Members of UD Greek Life,
geology majors, accounting majors,
editors of student publications.
Where are Rays?
Because I wanted to change my current environment in college.
Because I wanted to work towards making a safer and positive environment on my campus.
Because I know 2 people who were sexually assaulted their first year here.
Because I know too many people that are affected by relationship violence and sexual assault, and I really don't want to know anymore.
I joined because I'd like to see a day where groups like PAVE aren't necessary anymore.
We are making UD a safer place.
We are PAVE.
For more information, visit go.udayton.edu/PAVE, where you can find the bios of all of our current PAVE members, as well as some information about how you too can get involved in sexual violence prevention on the University of Dayton's campus.
So that was one of the projects that the PAVES took on, and I'll talk about that in a bit, but they actually created a video series that highlighted various resources on campus. I do believe that Michael has jumped on, so I want to give him an opportunity as well to introduce himself and share a little bit about his experience in PAVE.
Hi everyone, my name is Michael. I just graduated, which is terrifying, but I was a 4-year PAVE member. For 3 years, I was the recruitment coordinator. I always told people I loved peer education so much, I became a student instructor on campus for the biology department. And yeah, I had a great experience in PAVE. I participated in tons of different events, and I'm excited to share a little bit more about that with you guys as the presentation goes on.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. So I think it's important to think about where we were 9 years ago, because I think it's easy to see the structure that we have built now, and to get lost in that as opposed to how this really started. And so this group has gone through a wide variety of changes and shifts over the last 9 years. It really started out with 3 students, and it grew, and every step of the way of the growth, it was really driven by students. You know, when it first started, we didn't have an attendance policy until a number of the peer educators came forward and said, we really need to make sure that people are showing up. And then they are the ones who develop the attendance policy, not us. We didn't have an application process until the student said, we need an application process. We have always said that this is a democracy, whereas the peer educators are Congress and the advisor is the president. We can't take a step without the other one, but we also both have our independent voices and need to be working together and as a part of that community to make sure that we are supporting one another and that all of our trains are going in the same direction. We do have some leadership positions that eventually developed. We tried a lot of different formats in PAVE over the years, from committees working on specific projects where students could be a part of as many committees as they wanted. That became a little bit of a train wreck because everybody wanted to do all the committees, to having individuals only be able to pick one committee. We've now landed on liaison positions and coordinator positions. Liaisons were very clear from the beginning that they did not want a hierarchy. They didn't want a president and a vice president. They wanted liaisons whose job was to literally liaise between the advisors and the other peer educators. And the coordinators are the primary contact for each project. And then all the other PAVEs get to help and support those coordinators in whatever ways that they can. Colleen was actually our original liaison. So I'm going to turn it over to her to share any insights that you might want to share, Colleen, from the perspective of how you've seen it grow and what that liaison position has really looked like.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So I think to touch on the point that you said earlier, actually, about this president-Congress dynamic that we have. So with the liaison position specifically, I can say that that really is exactly how it's run. And, you know, Kristen has the tools, the background, the experience, the knowledge that, of course, we as undergrads just didn't have the training in. And so what that looked like was really Kristen bringing ideas to us. And so I remember her, I think it was my junior year, identifying me and saying, hey, I have this idea where I think we need some leadership. And other PAVEs had brought that idea forward. And so it looked like myself and Mary Margaret, another alumni, just sitting down with Kristen and just working through what that might look like. And we were able to ask the other PAVEs their thoughts and then ultimately determine what that leadership position looked like altogether. And so I think that dynamic was really key and I think that's what like, you know, where that empowerment piece comes in, but also where that getting out of the way piece comes in, where it's about presenting ideas and things that maybe we hadn't thought of and letting us determine what that means for ourselves, but then also allowing us the space to come up with the ideas and share that. So I think with the liaison position specifically, it was messy at first for sure. We were trying to figure out what would or leading meetings like, what would, sending emails out look like, more of the logistical things. But as we went throughout, I think we determined that having more of these leadership positions and acknowledging that we're all leaders in this space together, and most of the PAVEs really are people who are leaders and initiators. I think that dynamic was only able to grow once we said, what are people's strong points and where can you lead versus who's going to be the only leaders of the group. And so I think and that's a lot of the training that we do as well in PAVE, where we focused on, highlighting what people's strengths were and then seeing it more as a team effort of highlighting our own strengths rather than having a more hierarchical approach or having one person lead over another.
Awesome. Thanks, Colleen. And I think one of the things that Colleen really underlined too is the importance of those couple of students coming forward. That's really what started this group, is that we had 3 students, Vanessa, Stephen, and Megan, who came forward and said, we need to have a peer education program. And they were actually the folks who started this conversation on campus in a lot of ways. And to watch how they then were able to recruit their friends and get them on board, I think is really important. I don't know if you all have seen this. I'm going to show it just for the first minute to give you the idea of it. If not, I recommend that you check it out, the full video. But I think it underlines the importance of how do we create space where students who are passionate about this can come forward, say, this is something that's important. I'm going to put my neck out there and I'm going to say that this is important. And then I need to find other people to get on board too. And how do we encourage those followers to jump on board too?
If you've learned a lot about leadership and making a movement, then let's watch a movement happen start to finish in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons. First, of course, a leader needs the guts to stand alone and look ridiculous. But what he's doing is so simple, it's almost instructional. This is key. You must be easy to follow. Now here comes the first follower with a crucial role. He publicly shows everyone else how to follow. Notice how the leader embraces him as an equal. So it's not about the leader anymore. It's about them, plural. Notice how he's calling to his friends to join in. So it takes guts to be a first follower. You stand out and you brave ridicule yourself. Being a first follower is an underappreciated form of leadership. The first follower transforms a lone nut into a leader. If the leader is the flint, the first follower is the spark that really makes the fire. Now here's the second follower. This is a turning point. It's proof the first has done well. Now it's not a lone nut and it's not 2 nuts. 3 is a crowd and a crowd is news. A movement must be public. Make sure outsiders see more than just the leader. Everyone needs to see the followers because new followers emulate followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, then 3 more immediately. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point and now we have a movement. As more people jump in, it's no longer risky. If they were on the fence before, there's no reason not to join in now. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, and they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. And over the next minute, you'll see the rest who prefer to stay part of the crowd, because eventually they'd be ridiculed for not joining. And ladies and gentlemen, that is how a movement is made. So let's recap.
What I love about that is that it spotlights the diffusion of innovation. This is what that is making sure that we are starting this process in a way where we can essentially get that early majority on board. I hear a lot of people talk about capacity building when they're starting a peer education program, and I think that's really important to make sure that you've got your ducks in a row as you're launching this. My caution around capacity building actually would be to make sure that you're not taking too many action steps before you have the students on board. The students need to be a part of all of these decisions that are being made. When we just launched co-pilots 2 years ago, I only had about 25% of the plan of the group created before I actually started recruiting students. And I had about 10 students in there. And one of the questions that I was getting from colleagues on campus was, you only have 25% of the plan. Like, when are they going to meet? How's the structure going to be? What are the expectations? And my answer back was the students need to decide that. And I think that that's something that's really critically important, is that if this is about student voice, then we need to make it about student voice. So we need to build capacity. We need to make sure that our administrators and our supervisors are on board and are eager to support the initiative. And then we need to pause, get the students in the room to make sure that they can actually be a part of planning that and co-creating it with us. It really is dependent on those relationships that you build with the students. A lot of time with the peer education starting, especially, sorry, I just blurred over my words, especially at the very beginning, is really about that relationship development. They need to be able to walk into your office and say things. They need to know that you're going to be there to support them. And they need to know that you feel invested, so that if they show up at something, you're going to be excited to see them. Or if they're not there, you're going to shoot them a text and say, hey, I noticed you weren't here. Are you okay? Do you need anything? That relationship development is what's going to keep them coming back. Before I jump into basic structure that currently exists, anything to add from, I know Colleen has to go, she hasn't already, from Colleen or Michael around anything that I just shared?
Yeah, so a lot of times we hear in these groups that there's not a, there's not a leadership position, right? That it is president and Congress. But there's a big difference between saying that and acting it. And I think Kristen did a really good job of underlining that. I've received numerous texts from her. Hey, I noticed you weren't at the meeting today. Is everything good? Or I've shot back a text. Hey, I'm really struggling with this portion of my work. Is there any way you could give me some support and set up a meeting? It that relationship comes from, hours and hours and hours of relationship building. So being able to put that time in on the front end and really solidify your group and make sure that you guys are a family, a group that will participate with one another is really going to pay dividends on the back end.
Cool, thanks. So this is our current structure now. I want to underline again that this is always growing and changing, and it's really driven by the student participants. We do have a collaborative training design. So for the first time this past year, all of our peer educators came together to do training together, and I'll talk more about what that agenda looked like. What was so wonderful about that is that it really highlighted the intersectionality of their work. So they're all having challenging conversations. They just are about different topics, but the reality is that there's a lot of intersection between all of them. And so to bring them all together under one roof so that they're all learning motivational interviewing training, and they're all learning about privilege and oppression, and they're all learning about relationship development, that allows them all to advocate for one another's work in some really cool and strategic ways that we have seen play out this year. This is a mini course. On our campus, we can create mini courses that are outside of academic departments. So this is a 1 credit hour course. As a part of that, it's just their weekly meetings as their course time. There is a 5-hour minimum requirement outside of the class meeting time that the students are required to fulfill. I would say on average, that's much closer to 15 hours that our students are actually doing each semester. And we do that on purpose. We want this to feel like a group that they can stay a part of, even if they have a really busy semester. So we oftentimes would see where a student might be really committed in the fall and they might be doing 25 hours throughout the semester. And then in the spring, they're like, look, I got to take 20 credit hours, or I'm studying for the MCAT, or whatever might be going on. I got to do my 5-hour minimum this semester. And then all of a sudden we would see them pop back in the fall at their historical capacity. And we wanted to be able to have that kind of flexibility that students could give their capacity to give any given semester. We do have a handbook that was also really driven by the students. Everything in our handbook, and I've got a screenshot of that in a moment, came out of a lesson learned. We had media requests, for example, that went to all of our peer educators. And so now we have a media policy. We had some folks that were wanting to drop by meetings and just kind of listen in. And so now we have a guest policy. So those are essentially the policies that this group has written as a team. The students were very heavily involved in writing those policies to make sure that we can set standards and understand here's what this group is about and here's what we're not about. We also, of course, have a syllabus for that course, and so that allows us to create some other guidelines as well. The students are participating in presentations. They're giving presentations across campus, and I'll talk more about all of this in a moment. PAVE chats, which are one-on-one conversations where students can opt into having a conversation for 30 minutes with a PAVE one-on-one, as well as campus-wide initiatives. So this is where we see things like Domestic Violence Awareness Month, Sexual Assault Awareness Month, et cetera. We do have a mentor program. So as a part of being in PAVE, everyone is assigned a mentor. This is a faculty or staff member who have come forward and said, I care passionately about this topic, and I want to be a part of it. So these aren't folks who on their job descriptions or mission to do this. We have faculty across campus. We have the director of our student union as a part of it. These are folks from across campus who are able to have these conversations in new ways. They meet with their PAVE mentee twice a semester. If they want to meet more often, they can. And we have a mentor guide that has essentially some starter conversations that mentors and mentees both receive to help them start the conversations if they're looking for a space to do that. But this really expands connection and sense of belonging for our peer educators. It also allows them to have these conversations with folks outside of the Brooks Center. So they have these conversations with us all the time. But how cool to be able to sit down with an English faculty member who's doing research on novels and rape culture from the 1800s, and to be able to sit down and have these conversations through that lens in a way that the Brooks Center staff just simply isn't able to do. It's a really powerful conversation. And then they're able to bring those moments from those mentor conversations into the larger meetings and share that with their peers. We do have those leadership positions, like we mentioned, the coordinator and the liaison positions. And then we have extensive communication that has been built in. So we do have a website. It's go.udayton.edu/PAVE. If you're interested in checking it out, you'll see those videos as well as all their profiles. We do have social media platforms, and they do have a newsletter that goes out once a month that is completely and entirely written by the peer educators. This is that training that I mentioned before. So this is the agenda here. We do training in January. We bring them back to campus early before the start of classes for the spring semester because we have a very heavily program heavy start of the fall semester. So we need to make sure that they're on board and ready to go as soon as August hits. We do something called consent cultures, where they go onto every first year floor on the residence halls in the month of September to do a 45-minute presentation on consent and bystander intervention. They do 70 presentations in the month of September. It is a whirlwind, and many of them say it's their absolute favorite time of PAVE. Then applications start right away. We do applications and interviews in October and November, and then folks on board in January. So this was the merge training across all 4 of the peer education groups. As you can see, folks like public safety come in. We talk about getting triggered. We do a lot of vision conversations with them. How do they fit into the larger conversation? We're talking about things like mandated reporting. We're bringing in key faculty and staff campus partners that we need to make sure that they know. These are our largest advocates across campus, to be able to say, you know what, I know it might feel scary to go to the dean of students office, but they've got this case manager named Paul, and he's really actually pretty cool. You should reach out to him. For them to be able to give that kind of credence is huge and makes a significant impact across campus. They do some breakout times so that they have their own opportunities to build relationships within their group. They also heard from multiple administrators. So every year, the president of the institution comes in, as well as the vice president of student development. And this is in many ways driven by our administrators. Dr. Spina has made it a real priority for him to build relationships with our peer educators. He comes in once a semester to their meetings typically, and comes in at training always. And I think this is really significant to be able to help the peer educators understand and see like their work is valued and it's seen by multiple levels of the institution. Michael, anything to add about the training experience or what that looks like?
Yeah, so the training experience, I really think there needs to be an emphasis on material and, understanding the content, but it's also a time to really expand connections, especially between institutional partners, like Krista mentioned. I always laugh. Me and the president were on a first name basis with each other, and I gave him a hug at graduation. But that all came from these trainings and intentionally reaching out to these campus partners. So really make that a priority.
So one thing that we do also talk to our peer educators a lot about is this idea of self-care versus self-soothing versus self-sabotage. I thought that this might be helpful to share just because I know that this is such a pop culture thing right now around, everybody do self-care, just draw a picture and you'll be great. And that's just simply not how life works in real life, and that's not what self-care actually looks like. And so we do talk to them about these kinds of concepts as well, of how are you taking care of yourself so you can take care of other people, and what's the true difference between self-soothing and self-care, because sometimes self-care kind of sucks, but that doesn't mean that it's not ultimately good for you in the long run. And so we do have these kinds of conversations with them as well, hopefully helping them instate some of that into their general practice. One of the things that PAVE did, again, student led, which was really cool, was that they started every meeting by going around in a circle and stating one thing that they did for themselves for self-care in the last week, since they had last seen each other. It was a wonderful way to start the meetings. They all got to talk, they all got to share things. There were some times where a student would say, I didn't actually have time to do self-care this week. And then the following week, another student would say, hey, you owe us two. So what were the two things that you did this past week? And they would hold one another accountable for that. And they would take care of each other. We heard disclosures about a lot of different things that were going on in their lives during those self-care checks. And it was so powerful to see them coming together as a community to really support one another as a team, and follow up with one another to make sure that they were all taking care of themselves. So we also, of course, highlight this idea of self-sabotage. Going out and blacking out on a Friday is only going to make life more challenging, not so much help, even though it might feel like you're getting to remove yourself for a moment. And so we talk about this with them as well. One of the other things that we talk about a lot with our peer educators is how they fit into the larger vision. And so we have this big picture document with sexual violence prevention at UD that talks about all of the different ways that we really approach this. I think so often we are juggling between this one-off presentation or one-off program with creating a larger system that these individual sessions can fit into. And to help the peer educators see this is how I fit into this larger structure is really, really important. And so we share this with them. We help them see here where your role is and seeing what this overall strategy looks like for sexual violence prevention. And so we have specific target presentations and programs that we do for first year students, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. Everything for sophomores is entirely PAVE run, and half of first year students is entirely PAVE run. And then PAVEs are very heavily involved in Green Dot programming and other initiatives that are campus wide that reach all 4 of these levels across campus. So for them to be able to see, wow, we're really taking on the responsibility of a good portion of this is really helpful for them to be able to understand that larger picture. So like I mentioned, we do have a handbook. These are the different categories that are in that handbook. So we do have expectations. Those have been co-written by the students. We do have mission and values. Those have also been written by the students. We have a contact list in the handbook for them to always be able to access. Some of them are cell phone numbers of staff. We do have the job descriptions, all of that kind of good stuff. The mentor program is outlined. They do have a space where they're able to gather in the Brooks Center, and so we have some expectations for that space. We do strategic representation of committees. It's not uncommon for somebody to reach out and say, hey, we'd love to have a PAVE on the Public Safety Advisory Committee or on this specific group that's coming together. And so they work together to figure out who's going to be representing the group on those committees. Let's see. We do have a probationary status policy in there as well. I'm not going to read through all of these. And then they do have a mandated reporter guide that they are able to use. It essentially is 3 different stages of here's when you really have to report immediately. Here's when, you really should consider calling us, but maybe you're not required to do so. And here are the situations where you really don't have to call us, but we're always available to be a resource for you to help you think through these different situations. And these are the categories for the syllabus. So we, of course, list course objectives, attendance, and things like that. It is a pass-fail class. So they're permitted to miss up to two classes. After that, they have to essentially work with us to create a replacement assignment. They do one-on-ones with the advisor throughout the semester, and then they have 2 reflections that they're required to complete. We offer 13 different reflection prompts, including one that says write your own prompt. So there's always opportunity for them to essentially come up with whatever they'd like to share. They are also encouraged to lead a discussion at a meeting if they'd like to, so they can run a meeting if they would like. There's been some really great conversations started there, everything from how do you actually process headlines and how do you find reliable information, to facilitation strategies that have worked well for older peer eds who want to pass that along to younger ones. There's been some really great stuff that comes up there. We also offer a voluntary summer reading book. So this started, quite frankly, because as the advisor, I was reading a really good book one summer and I just wanted to share it with them. And it started as if you chose to read it, come and let's have coffee one morning and we'll sit and read it. and talk about it. And it was something that kind of picked up and now has happened every year for the last 6 years. And so students can opt into this. It's not required, but we buy them the book, we give it to them in the spring, and we say, hey, if you want to read it, check it out, and we can review it together in the fall. Before I talk about presentations, Michael, anything to add about any of that content?
Pretty standard school stuff, but it's very obvious we know our expectations from day dot, which is very helpful. A lot of people when they join PAVE worry about meeting these expectations, but I think it's a older PAVE's job to show that these expectations, aren't really that daunting of task, and they can be accomplished with high success with relative ease compared to like other classes. Encourage people to join.
So they do provide a variety of different presentations across campus. So we are collaborative with One Love and their escalation workshop. We are really big believers in that. And so our PAVEs are the only facilitators of that across campus. Like I mentioned, they do that consent culture presentation. That was a presentation entirely written by the PAVEs. We spent a 3-hour night one evening, and they wrote that lesson plan. So we talked about learning outcomes. We talked about Bloom's taxonomy. We talked about how are you going to be innovative in delivering this content, and they planned out that entire lesson plan. As in the rest of these as well. The PAVEs are always writing their own lesson plans. The breakups, the good, the bad, and the ugly is really actually a stocking presentation, but we essentially talk about how do you break up in a healthy way, and how do you make sure that you're starting relationships in a healthy way, because so oftentimes that can start to blur the lines with stalking behaviors. We had a presentation that was developed by Emily Jones, a former student in PAVE who really partnered with athletics and created this locker room talk presentation that really looked at gendered language. She created separate presentations for the men's teams and the women's teams and went into every single team at UD as a part of their NCAA requirements to look at locker room talk and how they were holding one another accountable as the team members. And then PAVE chats are specifically designed for upperclassmen. What's really fascinating about these is that we get a lot of students bringing forward either disclosures, and so looking for resources. We'll have a lot of roommates reaching out and scheduling PAVE chats to be able to get more information to help a roommate or help a friend who's experienced some recent violence. And then we'll also get much more entry level conversations as well as more advanced conversations. So the students who maybe aren't seeing where they're at in the presentations that we're doing across campus, they can come to the PAVE chats and say, okay, now, but wait, tell me about the basics of this consent concept, or, let's talk about rape culture and media representation, and they can really go much more advanced, and the PAVEs are able to roll with it from every level. Michael, I'm going to do this one, and then I'm going to turn back to you to see if you have anything to add. So we also have these coordinator projects. I mentioned coordinators. So essentially, a student signs up and says, this is something that I'm passionate about. These topics were identified by the students, by somebody in the group who was passionate about it. So for example, street harassment, we had a woman on the team a few years ago who was very passionate about this. And this was her project the entire time she was here. And then once she left, nobody really had that same passion. And so it kind of died down a little bit. And it might come back again if we have somebody who has that kind of equal level of passion for it. So these are always coming and going and fluctuating based on the interests and passions of the students who are in the group at that specific time. They run the events, they manage it, they recruit other PAVEs to help them, and they're essentially supervising the other PAVEs who are helping them with that coordinator project. Michael, anything to add about any of the coordinator projects or any of the presentations or events that you all do?
Yeah, so I was the recruitment coordinator for 3 years. It's exactly right when you label these as passion projects. I'm very passionate about reaching out to others and talking to people. Obviously, why I'm talking to you all today. And that was just something I was really passionate about. And I hope I kind of left my mark on the group, and we'll see next year where the next person takes that. But just as Kristen said, where things die down and come back, we always are kind of in flux with presentations we do. A presentation that we forgot to add actually last year, Erica Moeller created this neurobio of trauma, and super interesting. That just happened to be her passion project. She's going to grad school in Georgia for psychology. But these presentations are always kind of available to pull from, and they're always kind of being fixed up, like, and presented in new ways. So consent cultures took a whole new spin when we went online for the pandemic, and that was really exciting and really challenging. But Just because you have a really, really good presentation doesn't mean that it's stagnant.
Absolutely. Thank you. I forgot to add that one. I appreciate you mentioning it. So one of the things that's really important is to make sure that as the students are out in front of a room, that they are using learning design and that they are representing your brand and what you are trying to communicate. We want to make sure that they're trauma informed. We want to make sure that they're saying high quality information across campus. And so we are talking about Bloom's taxonomy with them. They are writing learning outcomes. They're understanding what that means and what that looks like. And we are also having them practice presentations. So before any PAVE goes out in front of a room, particularly if this is a new presentation that they've just created, that lesson plan has been reviewed by the other peer educators. It's been reviewed by the advisors, probably by their mentor as well, because a lot of them have that kind of relationship with their mentor. They're then doing a practice presentation in front of the other PAVEs and in front of the advisors. They're getting that feedback. Sometimes we'll even do a practice presentation in front of one of the other peer education groups or things like that. We have a constant checks and balances process and system to make sure that they are always representing what the group wants and what the group feels across the board. We have a policy that no peer educator can speak on behalf of the group without getting the entire group to sign off on it. And so, for example, when the new regulations were open for comments, the PAVE group submitted a 7-page document for feedback when the Department of Education had opened up the opinions opportunity. And every member of the group read it and signed off on it. And so they really have this community, this team approach to make sure that if we have a presentation out there, even if only 6 of our 30 members are presenting it, we need to make sure that it's representing what PAVE represents. And so we need to watch it. We need to give feedback. We need to make sure that we're constantly updating it to make sure that it is relevant for students and it's not staying stagnant. We really rely on intrinsic motivation for our peer educators. I'm a pretty big believer in the fact that I think our biggest flaw in higher education is that we assume that students have no intrinsic motivation. And we assume that we can only get them bought in if we use some sort of extrinsic motivation. And so PAVE is not paid. We have brought it to the students multiple times over the years, and every time they've essentially come back and said, we don't think it should be paid because we're worried it'll attract the wrong people. We want to have the people who genuinely want to be part of this conversation. And so we really rely on intrinsic motivation for the students to be involved and to keep this conversation going. Having said that, we do give them some perks. So they do get 1 credit hour per semester because of that mini course. They do get VIP meet and greets with guest speakers who come to campus. So any national speaker that we bring, we always incorporate a dinner or ice cream social or something like that before or afterward, where they get to meet with those speakers one-on-one or in small groups, and to be able to learn more directly from them. They certainly, like Michael said, many of them feel as though they develop personal relationships with administrators across campus, and they feel as though their work is making an impact and is valued. We also are able to fund them for conferences sometimes. So these are some conferences that we have sent PAVEs to over the years to make sure that they are able to have those professional development opportunities. And if we're able to fund some of that, we are eager to do that. They are also all CPE certified through NASPA. So they certainly have that they can add to their resume. And then all of our PAVEs are also One Love certified. So we're always trying to find these professional development opportunities where they can learn more and get engaged in ways that they can opt into so that they can make sure that they are underlining, here's how I have developed as a peer educator, and here's why this makes me marketable as a graduate student or as a professional. We have a wide variety of different collaborations that are established across campus. So Don't Cancel Your Class is something that our PAVEs do utilize. They go into faculty's classrooms. So if a faculty member has a conference, they wake up and their kid's sick, they have to cancel class for any reason, they can call us. We send out a text message to the peer educators and say, hey, is anybody available at 11? And they can go in and do those presentations in the classrooms. We also do partner with athletics for NCAA requirements. One of our peer educators is actually a co-host on our podcast, Katie Hay, Upstream UD. You can access it anywhere podcasts are accessible. And then, like I said, we also have them in a variety of other different spaces, such as campus ministry retreats. Our study abroad presentation used to be from our professional staff, and that was actually co-created now by Colleen as somebody who had just come back from studying abroad. And so that's typically now co-presented with a student who is also a peer educator and recently studied abroad. So we're able to pull in those perspectives in a wide variety of other ways too. So this, I want to start to wrap up because I want to make sure that we have time for questions. As far as kind of like final advice, I was trying to think of ways that I could kind of send a couple of final messages out. For those of you who are starting a peer ed program, I would recommend find your starter students. It can be just 1, 2, or 3 folks that are really going to start to empower people and get that intrinsic motivation going. Train them well. We don't want them out there saying things that we don't want them saying. We want to make sure that they're only talking about things that they're qualified to talk about and that they're trained well. Our philosophy has always been start with yes and see what happens. So a student brings forward an idea. Our response is great. If you're willing to put in the work, then I'm willing to support you. Certainly, we want to screen those ideas to make sure that they're reasonable, but it's amazing what can happen if we start with yes and we set the bar high and see what they can accomplish. And then, as their advisor, remove their barriers as much as possible and then just get out of their way and let them shine and let them run and change the world. That's really what we're here to do. So this is my contact information. This is the Brooks Center's website. If you're interested in checking out PAVE's website, they are linked off of there as our co-pilots and the community leaders. Like I said, I really wanted to leave the last 20, 30 minutes or so for any kinds of questions or discussion that folks might have. So I'm actually going to stop screen sharing so that I can see folks. And Carrie, I don't know if you've had anything coming up in the discussion or questions.
No current questions in the chat, but to everyone, if you do have a question and would like to ask it, just a reminder, you can put it in the chat room. I'll be happy to monitor that, or you can use the raise hand function and I can work with you to get unmuted.
If you don't mind, can I start? It's funny because I'm like hosting, but I also like wrote down all of these like thoughts and ideas and maybe explanations too. So I'm so excited that like one of the things that you focused in on, well, all of the things that you both focused in on and as a peer as well. I'm so excited to hear directly from folks who went through it. I think that is, again, sometimes what's missing is like we've got this like plan. This adult plan, and then we talk about this plan and then we're like, who wants to be in the plan? And like come do this adult and plan, right? So I'm super excited that you were here. That's one thing, but you also very much detailed stay in your lane on specific topics that you have trained and are well versed on. How do you say no to things that are not in the lane of PAVE or any of your peer educators, or if people are just asking for one-offs and maybe not that engagement and relationship space? That's the one question. And the part two of it is you probably have way more going on in your professional staff that work on these outer levels, because I think what what we're doing sometime on campuses and what my purview that I see for being in and out of spaces on campuses for 20 years is that this is it. Like, let's just say this is it, peer educators, that's all we do on a campus, individual level work, and not working on systems and structures and policy change and that outer level work. So it's kind of a twofold question. How do you say no? And also, what are you doing in those other levels that support this work? And then I'll be quiet.
Awesome. I'm going to start, and then Michael, I want you to jump in too. So as far as how do we say no, I mean, we have had peer educators come forward with ideas that simply aren't in alignment with the mission and the vision of the peer ed group. I try really hard not to do a flat out no, because I want that voice to be there, and there's a reason why they're bringing it forward. And so if it's something where it just simply isn't in alignment, I will oftentimes try to find them an avenue where they can do it. So let's partner with this office, or have you met this colleague of mine? Maybe let's have them be your mentor next semester, and then you can be strategizing and thinking about this. And I think that that's one thing that's been helpful. Another is that sometimes just through some brainstorming, we can find a way to make it match the mission and vision. So, maybe the original idea doesn't specifically match what we do, but if we do these 3 tweaks, then it really starts to fall in line with our mission and vision. And so how can we maybe collaborate with somebody else who maybe really focuses on this other topic to make sure that that expertise is there, because we don't have that, but then we can make sure we're pulling in this other topic too. And so we kind of mold it with the student as they are pitching it and bringing it forward. For folks who just want to do a one-off thing, we actually don't shy away from that because we know that there's a larger system in place. So because I know that we've got these first year, sophomores, juniors, seniors, we've got these learning outcomes that are aligned up, we've got these specific initiatives that are going to each group, a one-off thing for me is a part of that larger structure. So I know that they're getting those other educational pieces elsewhere, and that this presentation is going to complement that other program that they were required to attend, or that they're going to be incentivized to attend through Housing and Residence Life, or whatever it might look like. And so because we have that intricate web, I don't actually see anything as one off on campus. Everything is complementing other things that we're doing and other sexual violence conversations that are happening. Your other question around supporting the work is certainly happening. We're certainly building infrastructure elsewhere. I mean, this is only one part of the sexual violence job on campus. We do EverFi, and we do, the ASI presentations that are brought in by professional staff. We do Green Dot. We are a big Green Dot campus. We've been a Green Dot campus for 8 years, and I love that program. Oh, Michael, way to represent. Look at you. Um, we are doing all these other things, and I think that speaks to that web of that nothing is one off, because maybe they're only seeing a Green Dot overview speech this semester, but I know that last semester they probably saw a PAVE do that consent culture, or maybe next semester they're going to do an escalation workshop. And so it's all going to continue to build on each other. Michael, what do you think?
Yes, the short answer is yes, but I also talk a lot, especially within PAVE, a lot of the times it's about planting seeds, especially as a peer educator, right? You have to realize that you're not an expert in this field. You just have had more extensive training than maybe somebody else, right? So if a person would attend a one-off thing, like I tend to do a lot of little one-off things about masculinity, healthy masculinity, toxic masculinity, right? And maybe they don't completely grasp every topic around healthy breakups, right? But I'm able to plant a seed that encourages it not to be a one-off experience. At that point, you're connecting them to other presentations, other resources. So even though it might technically be a one-off, I don't view it that way either.
One of the things that Michael is referencing is that sometimes we'll get requests. So maybe there's a dynamic on a floor in a residence hall that something problematic happened, or maybe we have a student who the conduct office believes would really benefit from sitting down with a student one-on-one. Sometimes we'll tap some of our strongest students and ask them to sit down or to facilitate a conversation. And so we are building that with them. That is an absolutely collaborative process. Where we're saying, here's the current need, here's what capacity I know you have. Michael is exceptional at talking about masculinity and helping men see why their role is important in this conversation. And so to be able to pull him into those circles and to be able to say, look, I can stand in front of a bunch of 18-year-old guys, but I'm just old, and they're not gonna, they don't have any interest in hearing what I have to say, but they're going to hear you. And so how do we make sure that you have the information that you need to be able to deliver that content in a meaningful way? And that's been incredibly successful as well.
Thank you. And I think Keith has his hand up, right, Carrie?
Sorry, my mouse is giving me problems, like trying to.
No problem.
Sorry, Keith. Right, here we go. You should be able to unmute yourself now. There you go.
Really good presentation. Quick question. I've been looking into, or at least trying to look into the Love Foundation. Have you found their workshops to be informative in terms of what your peer educators are able to, what information are able to glean to that, and kind of present that to the students?
Michael, you start.
Well, first off, One Love does a great job with their soundtrack. So if you're looking just for some music, I recommend their escalation chats immensely. But more about that, One Love does an excellent job of, I always say they provide the backbone for what we talk about. But in the same way that, the PAVEs and our advisors work hand in hand, we found that those escalation chats really work well when you go hand in hand with the students as well. What's very interesting about One Love is it's very accessible for people that have little knowledge about sexual assault and sexual violence and tons of knowledge, right? So you're going to get a wide array of different people you're communicating with. So being a peer facilitator in that environment can be kind of scary the first time you do it, but I always looked at them as fun challenges, right? So you're going to get the question that's super advanced, and you're going to get the I don't really understand what happened with the guy. Like, what can somebody explain this to me, right? So being able to work in a space and work in a way that is collaborative with your people you're working with, and also your supporting team members that are also in the conversations with you, is really exciting, and I think really a excellent aspect of One Love that goes unrecognized.
So I'll add a couple of things to what Michael just shared. One is that we found that, and Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, but men tend to be much more active in that conversation than in other presentations that we do. I think that it's a bit more approachable for a lot of our male students, and so that's been something that we've definitely seen. One is that another thing is that we've gone a little bit off script of what One Love recommends, in that we don't allow any student to get certified in it and to run them across campus. The only people getting certified are our peer educators. They're working under us constantly and in constant communication to make sure that they have the support that they need as students, so that if somebody says something triggering in a presentation, that they also have that support with us. We also always have them co-facilitate. So One Love recommends one facilitator. We always have two. We have had multiple circumstances where somebody gets triggered in ways that they just didn't expect to. And I always want to make sure that they have another peer educator that's sitting there to make sure that they have that support. And so that's always a go-to for us. We also created kind of a one-pager kind of cheat sheet, if you will, that is also specifically inclusive around various identities. So our students, as they're facilitating it, they're also sitting on this one pager that can give them some language to talk about queer relationships, or to talk about relationships amongst people of color and how that might look different than the video, and how this video is very white. And so how do we think about that broader? And so we've utilized additional resources for that, all of which was also peer ed created and developed. But we're big One Love supporters. We really appreciate that program.
There are a couple questions in the chat. So the first one, we are thinking of moving our peer education program to an 8-dimension of wellness approach to provide a more holistic wellness programming. Do you offer education for financial, spiritual, physical, emotional, mental, etc.?
It's a great question. So we've actually been having this conversation a lot in the last couple of years. We are a very collaborative campus, and so our financial aid folks and our career services folks do a lot of financial education. Our campus ministry does a lot of spiritual education. And so we don't necessarily use the 8 dimensions in quite that way on our campus. We do fall on the NERSA definition of well-being. That's really what guides our work from a theoretical perspective. We also have a step care model that we've developed internally for our institution that I'd be happy to share. If you send me an email, I can send that along to you. It's also available on our website. So we have kind of created our own alternate path, if you will. We still are certainly referencing the 8 dimensions, but we don't necessarily use that as a cornerstone of our work, because we have other campus partners who are doing other aspects of that wellness programming.
Awesome. And do you have any tips for non-paid student engagement / attendance at your events? We offer many prevention programs, but struggle with attendance / buy-in.
Yeah, that's tough. So we have a system on campus that not a lot of campuses have, so I have to own that. That really helps us with this. We have essentially a housing incentive. So for those of you who aren't familiar with University of Dayton, we essentially own 450 houses. Imagine the university without the suburb that was right next to campus, and our upperclassmen live in those homes. It is Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like address becomes their identity. They ask address before they ask major of other students and folks that they're connecting with. Alum come back and say, I lived at 320 Kefauver. I don't even know if that's a real address, but like they will say their address. And so we have an incentivization program where they come to an educational event and we can attach a point to it. And the more points they get, the better housing they get. And so we do assign a lot of our programs, not all. We're very intentional around that, because some events we can't have path points attached to. We don't do it for Green Dot training, for example, because if you're there talking about sexual assault on a Saturday, I really need you to want to be there because of the nature of that program. But escalation workshops we do path credit for. So that has helped us huge. I think it goes back to that internal motivation as well. Are there ways that you can tap into some of that internal intrinsic motivation? Are there ways that you can maybe tap into a different kind of marketing approach? So before PATH was on campus, we certainly were working with this kind of a conversation too, and we would do hookup presentations, and students loved coming and talking about hooking up. And then we would talk about how healthy and unhealthy communication patterns tied into hookup culture, but they're never given a formalized structure and a safe space to be able to talk about hooking up and to be able to process that and all of their stuff that comes with it from their experience, and just trying to wrap their head around it. in a space that they're going to be respected and not judged, and maybe even have some research to back up what we're saying. And so to be able to say, hey, the average college student who engages in hookups is actually only 2/3 of college students, by the way, and the average one only actually hooks up once a semester on average. To be able to say that to them and then help them process that, it actually opened a door for us then to be able to talk about perpetration patterns and consent and conversations in a way that they wanted to join in the conversation. So that was really helpful for us. Finding those Cedar students, Michael was one of those for us. I have no idea how we're going to replace him in the fall, because we could send him out to a table for 2 hours and he would have all kinds of students lining up because they were so excited by his energy. How do you find your Michael? Tell me how, because I need to find a new one. I'm going to bring him back, even though he graduated, because I think that's really important, that they're seeing a friend doing that, and that gets back into that diffusion of innovation as well. Of I'm old, and I am at 9 o'clock on a Saturday, I'm trying to get my 5-year-old to go to sleep. I'm not out in the neighborhood. Michael was. And so he is able to speak to them from that level. Any way that you can get those peers out in front of them, I think can really encourage that attendance. Michael, anything to add for that one?
Yeah, I got a couple things on that one. First off, 429 key favor, that was my house, just so you guys know. But this is a constant conversation, especially in our peer ed group, because I always told people we aren't necessarily, a fun student org, right? My roommate was on the water ski team. So you're always able to tell people, hey, I'm on the water ski team, we're gonna water ski, right? For peer eds, it's not that intrinsic draw. So part of the struggle and part of the challenge of being in a peer ed group like this is finding events that people want to go to. This last year we did Ignite the Night, which is it's kind of like it manifests in lots of different ways, but it's really about bodily autonomy and owning, especially for survivors, your body, because a lot of them have distrust in their body. So to incorporate that, we did a black light yoga at the rec, and we advertised at the rec, and I was shocked. We had almost 80 students show up, and no path credit associated with that, no incentive besides, hey, come and do blacklight yoga, and while you're here we'll teach you. So if you're able to work in some of these fun incentives into your learning outcomes, you're going to have much more success than being like, hey, come to another class that you're not getting any credit for. Speaking about safety, I'm a big believer in the hierarchy of needs, right? And safety's, foundational. If you're not creating spaces where kids aren't able to ask honest and real questions, then you're wasting your time in whatever space you're in. A lot of times I would go into spaces that equity compliance Title IX asked me to go and give a presentation with a co-facilitator, right? And straight up off the bat, I said, this is the space to ask problematic questions that you've never been able to ask before, right? And there are things that are inappropriate, and I will mention that, but there's a difference between an inappropriate question and a wildly uninformed answer. The craziest answer I ever got in a presentation was, men don't get sexually assaulted. Okay, let's start with that point. We'll jump from there, right? Why do you think that, right? And here's why, you know, I'm going to challenge that belief and I'm going to challenge you to grow. I don't need you to get all the way to the point that, sexual assault occurs to men, but I need to plant the seed. I need to start those conversations with others. And, maybe there's other people that just were too scared to voice that question. But if I, as a peer educator, jump on that and shut it down immediately and go, oh, you're wrong and you've been taught wrong and you're just a bad person for thinking that. Well, okay, I've not addressed the belief. I've now demonized this person in front of what are supposedly his friend group. And I've not encouraged attendance at future events, because why would you come back if I'm just going to demonize you? So if you say there's a safe space and you're encouraging that, selling that, sell it and make it an actual point of your presentations. That's how you build engagement over 4 years.
Awesome. Also a question about, will you make the syllabus, training handbook, etc. available to us, or can we find this online?
So I'm happy to share that. None of that's online, but if you send me an email, I drop my email in the chat. I'm happy to share that with folks. Just let me know what you're looking for.
And that looks like it for the question so far. Sorry. dealing with 3 screens and a mouse that's
Yeah.
jumping across them, so I apologize.
I might have not, we might have, I don't know if I've missed this, but Keith asked how popular is the PAVE class canceled option?
Yeah, so that's a part of a larger system on campus. So Don't Cancel Your Class is on our website as well if you want to check it out. We actually have 8 different offices that partner with us, and faculty can go onto our website and request a presentation. So it lost a lot of popularity during COVID because of online learning and things like that. I think people were much more likely to just cancel classes. But the year before COVID, I think we had about 100 requests throughout the year. So PAVE is just one of those different branches, although I will say that they were one of the most requested because I think the faculty really appreciated having students come into the space. A lot of them actually would start incorporating them into their class in future semesters too. So we would send in an escalation for a Don't Cancel Your Class one semester, and their students loved it so much that they started incorporating into their syllabus and bringing us back every semester with escalation. So that's been really cool to see. I think there are some logistical challenges with the Don't Cancel Your Class option. As staff, we tell faculty, give us as much notice as you can, but if that means morning of, we've had faculty contact us at 7:30 saying, can you cover my 5 classes today? And we can cancel meetings and move things around and prioritize being in front of students. Student facilitators can't always do that as easily in their class schedules. And so there's a little bit of a logistical navigation that I think is important to establish with your students around, are you guys okay with this? What kind of last minute communication are you comfortable with? I'm a texter. So I text my students and they in general have said that's okay with them. I think it also allows them to increase comfortability with me. So, at 1:00 in the morning on a Saturday, if they get a disclosure and they need help, they know that they can call me at 1:00 in the morning. So are they comfortable with that? Are you comfortable sitting there on your cell phone and texting your students and saying, hey, we need coverage at 11:00. Are you available? So I think that's a personal preference for each person, but it has been a really, really great program. It's a collaboration strategically with the provost office. So we work with them strategically. And it's been great to just even pull faculty into the conversation in some new ways that we wouldn't have been able to without that program as well.
I have another question. Thinking of your professional staff, so I know that the peer educators are tiered, and I don't think any of them are directly compensated, but you do have pro staff positions. So one, could you talk to us about your pro staff positions? And then two, the capacity, or when I use capacity, I meant the funding. Like, you are obviously getting funding for primary prevention because you're using upstream approaches. Um, how has that developed over the years, the ask? Because I think people just quit asking sometimes. And so could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I mentioned, we have 4 professional staff in addition to myself. Each of the topics within the Brooks Center has a professional staff member that's committed to that topic. Each of them have their own peer ed program, except our health equity and our mental health educators. They co-advise our co-pilots. Like I mentioned, it's a significant time commitment for our professional staff, and I think that they love it. So don't get me wrong. I mean, I think that working with peer eds is some of the best parts of our job. But it is a lot of work. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of hours. And it can be after hours too, because you never know when they're going to text you and say, I've got something going on, or I just got this disclosure, which is what we train them to do. We want them to contact us, but we also need to be prepared for that it could be on a Friday night and you're getting a text message at 9:45 because they're at the bar and they just had a disclosure happen, which actually happens surprisingly often. So I think as far as a budgeting perspective, we've been very blessed to have presidents that have very strongly supported this work. Since I've been at UD, both of the presidents that I have served under have strongly supported it. Our vice president is very strongly supports this work. And so we have had the support. I will say that I also am a really big believer in being creative. So a lot of our most impactful programs didn't cost us anything. The podcast, for example, we've had almost 20,000 listens to that in the last year, and it cost us nothing. It's a peer educator and a professional staff member. They collaborate, and they invite folks to participate, of which Anne Brandon is one of them. You can listen to her episode on our website. And so there are ways that you can make really significant impact without the cost. Now, there are other programs that are much more expensive. Green Dot, I think, is an example. It's certainly a bit pricey to get your folks certified. And then the training, what I love about it is that you can make it as expensive or as little expensive as you have the option to do. We have opted into doing things like the t-shirts that Michael is wearing. You only get those if you've gone through the 6-hour Green Dot training on our campus. And so we purchase those for anybody who's gone through Green Dot training. We buy them lunch. There's some things like that we've opted in to do, but that you could easily opt out of. And so we're constantly kind of thinking about that as well, particularly as budgets fluctuate and shift over the years, of how can we be creative and how can we connect with alum? How can we connect with local organizations to make sure that we're using all of our resources as wisely as possible?
Thank you so much.
There's 5 pro staff paid positions, including mine, plus a GA.
Thank you.
Yep.
Robin, I just want to say that right now, if you are able to do the virtual option, Green Dot is $1,000 per person. So if you are able to get 4 or more registered at the same time, so that's a bit of a savings there. So just an update.
They have also worked with us in the past.
Mhm.
That if you have limitations but you're really committed, I would encourage you to reach out to their staff. Any other questions that we can answer?
I might have one last one. Social marketing, social norms, social media, things in that communicating the message. Is that kind of a part of your strategy? Because I mean, I know we talked about the podcast, but like thinking of what a peer educator would take and how you also deliver that in primary prevention. And then I won't ask any more questions because I'm sorry.
Michael, you want to take that one? I'm not familiar you are with
Sure.
our work.
Yeah, so we have lots of different ways we utilize, I'm going to say media first. We have the newsletter, we have pamphlets, but our most successful is our social media. This year we had one of our social media coordinators graduate out, and we passed it to a freshman, and they last year were absolutely killing it with the social media. And the reason I would advocate for an effective social media presence is you have to think about what your kids are utilizing and what your kids are going to be constantly updated with, right? The best thing I think we ever did as a peer ed organization was move away from pamphlets, because freshman year I got handed so many little pamphlets about PAVE and stuff, and I read one of them ever, and I joined the group my second semester. So I mean, it's just like life. You get handed a million papers, especially as a college student, right? You always have papers, right? And you got to go talk to people again, right? Social media is a very low contact activity that yields high rewards, right? Because as a user, you can go back to information, right? You don't have to keep track of information. It's all there. Overwhelmingly, kids utilize social media and kids communicate through social media. So being a presence where they can reference each other and send each other things is absolutely huge for our mission. And it's a very interactive, low cost way to continually reach your audience that is not directly a part of your peer ed group.
I will say we have social media guidelines. So we don't approve every post that the peer educators make, but we do have a one pager that outlines, here are the things we talk about, and here are the things we don't talk about. Here are the things that you can post about, here are the things you should talk to us about first before you post, just so we can help you with language. And so that's been really helpful from an advisor perspective too, to make sure that we're not getting bogged down by all of those posts, but that we also have some guardrails for them.
Thank you so much on that. Carrie, I don't see any more questions, and I'm not sure if anyone else wants to say anything about the programming or just great job. it's taken a long time to build that. That doesn't happen overnight. So I just want to say thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for the time. I would underline what Anne said, is that this is 8 years, 9 years in the making. So start small. And certainly we're always happy to connect with colleagues. So please feel free to reach out.
Kristen, thank you, Michael, and of course, thank you to Colleen, who had to jump off to go do important work again. But thank you for sharing your experiences with us here today and helping our campuses as they consider peer education programs and models for their campuses. I'm so excited about the work that you're doing there at the Brooks Center. I know what was about a year ago, we were talking about it, right, Kristen? Like getting this program off the ground and everything at the center. So just so thrilled to see where everything is going and the directions and the impact you're making. So thank you to all of you. Thank you to our participants today who joined us and asked such great questions and gave up your time today. So thankful to have all of you here. And Anne, once again, thank you for helping to coordinate the series. I hope everybody has a good, healthy, relaxing Memorial Day weekend. Take care, everybody. And thank you again for being here today.